When I saw what was hidden in my son's lunch bag, I thought my worst nightmare had come true. My own child was keeping a secret so devastating, it would tear our family apart forever. There I was, standing in my kitchen at 63 years old, holding what looked like drug paraphernalia in my trembling hands. Glass vials, needle-like devices, mysterious strips of paper. My mind raced to the darkest places a mother's heart can go. Was Marcus selling prescription drugs? Had financial pressure pushed my hardworking son into something dangerous and illegal? But what I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about being a mother, about trust, and about the secrets we keep to protect the people we love most. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments. Have you ever found something that made you question everything about someone you love? Because what happened to me that Tuesday morning will make you think twice about the assumptions we make about our own families. I'm Granny Rosie, and this is a story about how one accidental lunch bag exchange exposed a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for months. A truth that nearly destroyed my relationship with my son, broke my daughter-in-law's spirit, and taught me that sometimes the people we're trying to protect are actually protecting us right back. Let me back up and tell you how I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my family was wrong. My name is Rose Patterson, but everyone calls me Granny Rosie. I've lived in the same house in suburban Ohio for 37 years, raised 3 children, and buried a husband who left us too soon. At 63, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at a family. I was wrong. My son Marcus has always been my quiet one. Even as a little boy, he'd rather fix a broken toy than tell you it was broken in the first place. He's 31 now, built like his father was, broad shoulders from years of construction work, hands that can fix anything, and a smile that lights up a room when he actually uses it. Marcus married Bethany 5 years ago, and they gave me the most precious gift in the world, my granddaughter Ruby, who just turned 8 and has her daddy's stubborn streak and her mama's bright green eyes. From the outside, they looked like the perfect young family. Marcus worked steady construction jobs, never missed a day unless Ruby had a school play or Bethany needed him home. Bethany managed their household like a military operation, meal planning, budget tracking, Ruby's school activities, all while working part-time at the local veterinary clinic. They bought a modest 3-bedroom house 2 years ago, nothing fancy but clean and welcoming, with a swing set in the backyard that Marcus built himself. But over the past few months, I'd started noticing things. Little things that probably wouldn't bother most people, but when you're a mother, you develop radar for when something's off with your children. Marcus had lost weight. Not dramatically, but enough that his work shirts hung a little looser. His face looked a bit thinner. When I mentioned it, he'd brush me off with talk about getting in shape and working out more. But I never saw evidence of this supposed fitness routine, and Marcus had never been one for gyms or running. Then there were the family dinners. Every Sunday for 5 years, they'd come over for my pot roast and mashed potatoes. Marcus used to go back for seconds, sometimes thirds. But lately, he'd pick at his food, decline dessert, and excuse himself to the bathroom more often than seemed normal. When I'd offer to pack leftovers, he'd politely refuse, claiming they had too much food at home already. Bethany seemed different too. She'd always been chatty, filling any silence with stories about Ruby's school adventures or funny things that happened at the vet clinic. But recently, she'd grown quieter, more watchful. I'd catch her looking at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something that looked almost like frustration. The strangest thing was how Marcus had started bringing his own snacks to family gatherings. Little protein bars, nuts, things he'd pull from his pockets when he thought no one was looking. When I asked about it, he'd say something about keeping his energy up for work or trying to eat healthier. It seemed reasonable enough, but it felt wrong somehow. This was a man who used to demolish half a chocolate cake at birthday parties. Ruby seemed oblivious to whatever tension existed between her parents, but kids are smart. I noticed she'd started asking me more questions about her daddy. Was he feeling okay? Why did he go to the bathroom so much? Why didn't he eat grandma's cookies anymore? I'd reassure her that grown-ups sometimes change their eating habits, but her questions stuck with me. The financial stress was obvious, though they tried to hide it. Bethany had picked up extra shifts at the clinic. Marcus had mentioned turning down some weekend overtime work, which made no sense for a man trying to pay off a new mortgage. When I offered to help with Ruby's school supplies or suggested family outings, they'd politely decline, insisting they were doing fine and didn't need any help. But the biggest red flag was how they'd both started avoiding certain topics. Medical appointments, insurance, anything health-related would make them exchange glances and change the subject. When my neighbor Helen mentioned seeing Marcus at the pharmacy during work hours, and I casually brought it up, both Marcus and Bethany went silent in a way that felt heavy and uncomfortable. I told myself I was overthinking things. Young couples go through phases. Financial pressure can strain anyone. Maybe Marcus was just stressed about work. Maybe Bethany was tired from juggling everything. Maybe I was being the overbearing mother-in-law I'd always sworn I wouldn't become. But deep down, in that place where maternal instinct lives, I knew something was seriously wrong. I just had no idea how wrong, or how long they'd been carrying this burden alone. Have you ever met someone who seemed perfect, but something felt off? Drop a comment and tell me about your gut feelings that turned out to be right. Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in my kitchen, making coffee and planning my day, when I heard Bethany's car in the driveway. This wasn't unusual. She often dropped Ruby off before school when Marcus had early job sites, and I loved getting extra time with my granddaughter. But when I opened the front door, something felt immediately wrong. Bethany's car was running, and she barely made eye contact as she hurried up my walkway. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days, and there was a frantic energy about her movements that set off every alarm bell in my head. "Morning, honey," I called out, expecting to see Ruby bouncing behind her with her colorful school backpack and endless chatter about whatever 8-year-old drama was happening in her classroom. Instead, Bethany thrust a plain black bag into my hands. "Ruby forgot this at daycare yesterday," she said quickly, already backing toward her car. "Can you make sure she gets it at school?" I looked down at the bag, confused. This wasn't Ruby's backpack. It was too big, too plain, and definitely not the bright purple one covered in unicorn patches that she'd picked out herself at the start of the school year. "Bethany, wait," I called, but she was already in her car, pulling out of my driveway faster than necessary. She gave me a quick wave through the window, but even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the steering wheel like she was holding on for dear life. I stood on my front porch for a moment, holding this mysterious black bag and trying to make sense of what had just happened. In 5 years of marriage, Bethany had never been anything but warm and talkative with me. She'd never dropped something off without coming in for coffee, never left without at least a few minutes of conversation about Ruby or work or the weather. Back in my kitchen, I set the bag on my counter and really looked at it for the first time. It was a soft-sided cooler, the kind Marcus carried to work every day. Black nylon with a sturdy zipper, practical and unremarkable. Definitely not something that belonged to an 8-year-old girl. My first thought was that Bethany had grabbed the wrong bag in her rush to get out the door. Maybe Marcus had left his lunch cooler at their house, and in her frazzled state, she'd confused it with Ruby's school bag. It happened to the best of us. I'd certainly had my share of scattered mornings over the years. I should have just called her, told her about the mix-up, and arranged to exchange the bags properly. That would have been the normal, reasonable thing to do. But something about her behavior that morning, the avoidance, the hurry, the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes, made me hesitate. Instead, I found myself staring at that black cooler, my coffee growing cold in my hands, while a dozen questions ran through my mind. Why had Bethany seemed so nervous? Why hadn't she noticed she was carrying the wrong bag? And why did I have this growing feeling that this wasn't an accident at all? The zipper seemed to mock me as I debated what to do. Opening someone else's lunch bag felt like a violation of privacy, even if that someone was my own son. But the maternal instinct that had been nagging me for months was now screaming that something was very, very wrong. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I set down my coffee cup, took a deep breath, and slowly pulled the zipper open. What I saw inside made my blood freeze in my veins. Nestled beside Marcus's usual turkey sandwich were items that looked like they belonged in a crime drama, not a construction worker's lunch. Small glass vials filled with clear liquid. Plastic devices that looked like pens but had needles attached. Strips of paper in a black case. A small electronic device I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking as I lifted one of the pen-like devices. The label read Novolog in small blue letters, but the name meant nothing to me. All I could think about were the news stories I'd seen about prescription drug abuse, about people selling insulin and other medications on the street for cash. Had my son, my hardworking, honest son, gotten involved in something illegal? Had the financial pressure of the mortgage and medical bills pushed him to make dangerous choices? Was this why he'd been acting so strange? Why Bethany seemed so stressed? Why they'd been avoiding me? The room felt like it was spinning. I sank into one of my kitchen chairs, still holding that mysterious device, trying to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not to my family. Not to Marcus, who'd never even gotten a speeding ticket, who helped elderly neighbors with their yard work, who read bedtime stories to Ruby every single night. But the evidence was right there in front of me, cold and undeniable. My son was hiding something serious, something that required needles and vials and secrecy. Something that had turned my normally cheerful daughter-in-law into a nervous wreck who couldn't even look me in the eye. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, holding my son's secrets in my trembling hands and wondering how everything I thought I knew about my family could be so completely wrong. I couldn't just sit there staring at those mysterious medical supplies forever. My mind was racing between worst-case scenarios and desperate hopes for innocent explanations. Maybe Marcus had hurt himself at work and needed prescription pain medication. Maybe someone at his job site had asked him to pick up their prescriptions. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that didn't involve my son breaking the law. But even as I tried to convince myself of these possibilities, I knew I was grasping at straws. The secrecy, the behavior changes, the financial stress, it all pointed to something much more serious than a simple favor for a coworker. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. My first instinct was to call Marcus directly, but something held me back. If he was involved in something illegal, confronting him without knowing the facts could make things worse. He might panic, destroy evidence, or cut me out completely. And if there was an innocent explanation, I'd look like a paranoid mother who didn't trust her own son. Instead, I decided to do what any concerned parent would do in the age of the internet. I started researching. I carefully photographed each item in the lunch cooler with my phone, making sure to capture the labels and brand names clearly. Then I packed everything back exactly as I'd found it and zipped the bag closed. Whatever was happening, I didn't want Marcus to know I'd discovered his secret until I understood what I was dealing with. Settling at my kitchen table with my laptop, I began typing the names I'd seen into search engines. Novolog, insulin pen, blood glucose test strips. Each search result made my heart pound harder, but not for the reasons I'd expected. These weren't street drugs or illegal substances. They were medical supplies. Specifically, they were diabetes management tools. I spent the next 2 hours reading everything I could find about type 1 diabetes, insulin therapy, and blood sugar monitoring. The more I learned, the more pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The weight loss, the frequent bathroom breaks, the careful attention to food and timing, the exhaustion I'd seen in both Marcus and Bethany's faces. My son wasn't dealing drugs. He was dealing with a serious medical condition, and he'd been hiding it from me for God knows how long. But why? Why would he keep something like this secret from his own mother? We'd always been close. I'd supported him through his father's death, through job changes, through the early struggles of marriage and parenthood. What made him think he couldn't trust me with this? The hurt was almost as overwhelming as the relief. Relief that he wasn't involved in anything illegal, but hurt that he'd been suffering alone when I could have helped. When I should have been helping. I thought back over the past months with this new knowledge, and suddenly everything made horrible sense. The declined desserts weren't about dieting. They were about managing blood sugar. The bathroom breaks weren't suspicious. They were probably for testing or injections. The weight loss wasn't from working out. It was from a medical condition that had gone undiagnosed for who knows how long. And Bethany. Poor Bethany, carrying this burden alone, watching her husband struggle with a life-changing diagnosis while pretending everything was fine for the sake of family gatherings and social expectations. No wonder she'd seemed stressed and distant. No wonder she'd practically run away from my house that morning. The financial stress made sense too. I'd heard horror stories about the cost of insulin and diabetes supplies, even with insurance. For a young family already stretched thin by a mortgage and regular expenses, the added burden of ongoing medical costs could be crushing. But what broke my heart most was imagining Marcus dealing with the fear and uncertainty of a diabetes diagnosis without his family support. Learning to manage injections and blood sugar monitoring alone. Worrying about his job, his future, his ability to provide for Ruby, all while pretending nothing had changed. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, processing everything I'd learned. The anger I felt wasn't directed at Marcus or Bethany. It was directed at myself. How had I missed the signs? How had I let my son suffer in silence when I could have been there for him? More importantly, what was I going to do about it now? I knew I needed to talk to someone who understood diabetes better than Google could teach me. My neighbor Helen had been a registered nurse for 35 years before retiring, and she'd always been generous with medical advice for minor family concerns. If anyone could help me understand what Marcus was going through, it would be her. I walked across the street to Helen's house, carrying the photos I'd taken on my phone, but leaving the actual lunch cooler safely locked in my car. I wasn't ready to reveal whose supplies these were, but I needed professional insight into what I was dealing with. Helen answered her door in her usual gardening clothes, dirt under her fingernails and a warm smile on her weathered face. At 72, she was still sharp as a tack and had the kind of practical wisdom that comes from decades of caring for people in their most vulnerable moments. "Rosie, what brings you by this morning? You look like you've seen a ghost." I probably did look terrible. I hadn't slept well the night before, and the morning's discoveries had left me feeling shaken and uncertain. "Helen, I need your professional opinion on something medical, but I need you to keep this confidential. Can we talk privately?" Her expression immediately shifted to concern, and she ushered me into her living room. Helen had always been discreet about medical matters. It was one of the things that made her such a trusted neighbor. I showed her the photos on my phone, explaining that I'd found these supplies and was trying to understand what they were for. I didn't mention Marcus by name, referring only to a family member who might be dealing with health issues. Helen studied the images carefully, her experienced eyes taking in details I'd probably missed. After a few minutes, she looked up at me with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. "Honey, these are diabetes management supplies. High-quality ones, too. Whoever is using these has type 1 diabetes and is taking their care very seriously." She went on to explain what each item was for: the insulin pens for blood sugar control, the test strips for monitoring glucose levels, the lancets for drawing blood samples. She showed me how to read the medication labels and explained the difference between fast-acting and long-acting insulin. "This person is checking their blood sugar multiple times a day and adjusting their insulin accordingly," Helen continued. "That's exactly what they should be doing, but it's a lot of work. It's like having a part-time job just managing your health." I asked about the costs, and Helen's expression grew grim. Even with good insurance, diabetes supplies can run several $100s a month. Without insurance, it can be over $1,000. I've seen families go into debt trying to afford insulin. The financial piece of the puzzle clicked into place. No wonder Marcus and Bethany had been struggling. No wonder they'd been declining help and avoiding conversations about money. Helen, if someone was newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, what would they be going through emotionally? She sat back in her chair, considering the question carefully. It's devastating, especially for adults. Type 1 usually hits children, so when it develops later in life, it feels like your body has betrayed you. There's grief for the life you thought you'd have, fear about complications, worry about being a burden on your family. She paused, studying my face. Many people try to handle it alone at first. They don't want to worry their loved ones, or they feel ashamed that their body isn't working properly. It's not rational, but it's very common. The shame piece hit me hard. Was that why Marcus had hidden his diagnosis? Did he think I'd see him as broken or weak? Did he worry that I'd blame myself somehow, the way I'd blamed myself for not preventing his father's heart disease? The good news, Helen continued, is that type 1 diabetes is very manageable with proper care and support. People live full, normal lives with this condition. But the key word is support. It's much harder to manage alone. I thanked Helen for her time and expertise, promising to keep her informed about how things developed. Walking back to my house, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. Relief that I finally understood what my family was dealing with, and determination to make sure Marcus knew he didn't have to face this alone. But first, I needed to decide how to approach this delicate situation. Marcus had clearly gone to great lengths to keep his diagnosis private. Confronting him directly might feel like a violation of his privacy and could damage our relationship permanently. I decided to start with Bethany. She was carrying this burden too, and from what I'd observed, she might be more ready to accept help and support than Marcus was. What would you do if you discovered a family member was being manipulated? Would you tell them immediately or investigate first? Let me know in the comments. That evening, I called Bethany. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number, and I had to take several deep breaths before I could speak steadily. Hi, Bethany. I have Marcus's lunch bag, I said simply, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. I could hear Ruby chattering in the background, the normal sounds of a family evening, but Bethany said nothing. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Oh, I was wondering where that went." The way she said it confirmed what I'd suspected. This hadn't been an accident. Bethany had deliberately brought me that lunch cooler, and now she was terrified about what I might have found inside. "Bethany, honey, we need to talk." Another long pause. "Then I can't. Not tonight. Ruby's here, and Marcus will be home soon, and I can't." I could hear the tears in her voice, the exhaustion and fear that had probably been building for months. My heart broke for this young woman who'd been carrying such a heavy secret. "Tomorrow then. After Ruby goes to school. Come over for coffee, and we'll figure this out together. Rosie, She started, then stopped. "I promised him I wouldn't tell anyone. I promised." "I know, sweetheart. But sometimes promises become too heavy to carry alone. Sometimes we need help keeping them." She agreed to come over the next morning, and I spent the rest of the evening preparing for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. When Bethany arrived the next day, she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she moved like someone carrying an invisible weight. I placed the lunch cooler on my kitchen table between us and waited. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is give someone permission to tell the truth. Bethany stared at the bag for a long moment, then looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "He made me promise not to tell anyone," she whispered. "He was diagnosed 8 months ago. Type 1 diabetes, not the kind from lifestyle, the autoimmune kind." It just happened. One day he was fine, the next he was in the emergency room in diabetic ketoacidosis. The words poured out then, like a dam had finally burst. She told me about the terrifying night when Marcus had collapsed at home, how she'd called 911 while Ruby screamed in the background. About the 3 days in the hospital while doctors stabilized his blood sugar and taught him how to manage his condition. About Marcus begging the medical staff not to call me because he didn't want to worry me. He checks his blood sugar 4 times a day, takes insulin with every meal. Bethany continued, her voice breaking. He's been so scared, Rosie. Scared he'll have a low blood sugar episode at work and get fired. Scared Ruby will see him inject insulin and get frightened. Scared you'll think he's broken somehow. That last word hit me like a physical blow. Broken. As if my strong, capable son thought a medical condition made him less worthy of love or respect. But there was more. Bethany admitted they'd been struggling financially, not just from medical costs, but because Marcus had been turning down overtime work that conflicted with his injection schedule. He'd been skipping his lunch breaks to check his blood sugar privately, sometimes forgetting to eat altogether, which made his levels unstable and dangerous. The insurance covers some of it, but not enough, she said. We're spending almost $400 a month on supplies, and that's with the generic versions. I picked up extra shifts at the clinic, but it's still not enough. We're behind on the mortgage, behind on everything. The financial stress was crushing them, but the emotional toll was even worse. Marcus had become withdrawn and anxious, constantly worried about his blood sugar levels and their impact on his work performance. He'd stopped participating in family activities that involved food, afraid of having to explain his careful eating habits and frequent testing. I've been so angry with him, Bethany confessed. Not about the diabetes, about the secrets. About handling this alone. I love him, but I can't be his only support system. It's too much. I'm drowning, Rosie, and I don't know how to save us. She broke down completely then, sobbing with the exhaustion of someone who'd been holding up the world for too long. I moved around the table and held her while she cried, this young woman who'd been trying so hard to be strong for everyone else. As I comforted Bethany, I realized that Marcus's attempt to protect me had actually hurt the person he loved most. His wife had been carrying the full weight of his diagnosis, managing his fears and their financial crisis, while pretending everything was normal for the sake of family harmony. It was time for this family to stop protecting each other and start supporting each other instead. After Bethany's breakdown in my kitchen, I knew there was only one way forward. The secrets had to end, even if it meant risking my relationship with Marcus. I couldn't watch this family destroy itself trying to protect each other from truths that needed to be faced together. I want to talk to Marcus, I told Bethany as she wiped her tears with the tissue I'd handed her. Tonight. All 3 of us, sitting right here at this table. Her face went pale. Rosie, you don't understand. He'll be furious that I told you. He'll think I betrayed him. Honey, keeping his secret was betraying yourself. And it was betraying Ruby, who deserves to have parents who aren't drowning in stress and fear. I could see the conflict in her eyes, relief at finally having support warring with terror about Marcus's reaction. But I also saw something else, hope. For the first time in months, she wasn't carrying this burden alone. What if he shuts us out completely, she whispered. What if he decides we can't be trusted and pulls away even more? It was a valid fear, and honestly, I wasn't sure how Marcus would react. My quiet son had always been proud, sometimes to a fault. But I'd learned something important from my conversation with Helen. Diabetes was manageable with support, but potentially dangerous when handled alone. The stakes were too high for tiptoeing around his pride. Then we'll deal with that too, I said firmly. But Bethany, what you've described isn't sustainable. Marcus skipping meals, hiding his condition at work, you carrying all this stress alone. Someone's going to get hurt. Maybe seriously hurt. She nodded slowly, and I could see her resolve strengthening. Okay, but I want to call him myself. I want to tell him I need him to come over, that it's important. I agreed, and we spent the next hour planning what we'd say. Not rehearsing a script, but making sure we both understood that this conversation was about love and support, not judgment or blame. When Marcus's truck pulled into my driveway at 7:30 that evening, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the window, I watched him sit in his vehicle for a moment, probably steeling himself for whatever crisis he thought he was walking into. He knocked on my front door instead of just walking in like he usually did, a small sign that he sensed something was different. When I opened it, his face was guarded, his shoulders tense. "Mom, Bethany said you needed to see me about something urgent. Come in, sweetheart. We're in the kitchen." He followed me through the house, and I could feel his anxiety radiating behind me. When he saw Bethany sitting at my kitchen table with red-rimmed eyes and the black lunch cooler placed prominently between us, he stopped dead in his tracks. "What's going on?" His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the edge of panic underneath. I gestured to the chair across from us. "Sit down, Marcus. Please." He remained standing, his eyes moving between Bethany's tear-stained face and the lunch cooler. I could practically see him calculating how much we knew, how much damage control he'd need to do. "Is someone going to tell me what this is about?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. Bethany reached across the table and touched the lunch cooler gently. "I brought this to your mom's house yesterday morning. By accident." Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. Marcus's face went through several emotions in quick succession: confusion, realization, anger, and finally, resignation. He sank into the chair like all the fight had gone out of him. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly, not looking at either of us. "I know you have type 1 diabetes," I said gently. "I know you were diagnosed 8 months ago. I know you've been managing this alone because you thought you were protecting me." He looked up then, and I saw my little boy in his eyes, scared, overwhelmed, and trying so hard to be brave. "I know you've been skipping meals and turning down overtime work. I know the medical bills are crushing you financially. And I know your wife has been carrying this burden alone while you've been carrying yours." Marcus looked at Bethany with an expression of betrayal and hurt. "You promised," he said simply. "I was drowning," she replied, her voice breaking. "We were drowning, Marcus. I couldn't save us both." The silence that followed Bethany's words was heavy with 8 months of accumulated fear, exhaustion, and unspoken truths. Marcus sat with his head in his hands, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice muffled. "You can't understand what it's like to have your body just stop working. To go from being healthy and strong to needing machines and medications just to stay alive." He looked up at me then, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke my heart. "Do you know what it feels like to inject yourself with insulin 4 times a day and wonder if you calculated the dose right? To wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat because your blood sugar dropped too low? To be afraid that one mistake could put you in a coma or worse?" The raw honesty in his voice told me we'd finally broken through the wall he'd built around this secret. But there was more coming. I could see it building in his expression. "I've been terrified every single day for 8 months," he continued, his voice getting stronger. "Terrified that I'll have a low blood sugar episode at work and they'll fire me for being a liability. Terrified that Ruby will see me inject insulin and think her daddy is sick and dying. Terrified that you'll look at me the way you looked at Dad after his heart attack, like I'm broken and it's somehow your fault." That last sentence hit me like a physical blow. I'd never realized that Marcus had witnessed my guilt and self-blame after his father's death, or that it had affected him so deeply. But mostly, he said, looking directly at me now, "I've been terrified that you'd turn this into another thing you needed to fix, another medical crisis you needed to research and manage and worry about until it consumed you. I watched you do that with Dad, Mom. I watched you blame yourself for not preventing something that wasn't preventable." The truth of his words stung because they were accurate. After my husband's heart attack, I had thrown myself into cardiac research, diet changes, and medical appointments with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I'd convinced myself that if I just learned enough, controlled enough variables, I could prevent another tragedy. I couldn't watch you do that again, Marcus continued, tears streaming down his face now. I couldn't let you turn my diabetes into your failure as a mother. Because it's not. The doctors said it's autoimmune, probably triggered by a virus or stress. Nothing anyone could have prevented or predicted. Bethany reached across the table and took his hand. But keeping it secret was killing us both, she said softly. You've been so focused on protecting your mom from worry that you forgot I was drowning in it. Marcus turned to look at his wife, really look at her, for what seemed like the first time in months. I know, he whispered. I know I've been selfish. I know I've put everything on you. But I didn't know how to handle this any other way. You could have trusted us, I said gently. You could have trusted that we're stronger than you think we are. He laughed bitterly. Trust? Mom, I've watched you blame yourself for every bad thing that's happened to this family since Dad died. I've watched you turn every minor illness into a research project and every setback into evidence that you failed somehow. How was I supposed to trust you with something this big? His words were harsh, but they were also honest. And honesty was what this family had been missing for 8 months. You're right, I said, surprising both of them. I have done those things. I have turned worry into a full-time job and guilt into a hobby. But Marcus, that doesn't mean you should have handled this alone. It means we all needed to do better. I looked at both of them, my son, exhausted from carrying a medical condition in secret, and my daughter-in-law, exhausted from carrying the weight of that secret with him. It means we needed to have this conversation 8 months ago, when we could have figured out how to support each other instead of how to protect each other from the truth. Do you think the narrator is handling this the right way? Should they have done anything differently? Share your thoughts below. The kitchen fell quiet except for the sound of Marcus's quiet crying and the tick of the wall clock that had marked time through so many family conversations over the years. But this felt different from any discussion we'd ever had, rawer, more honest, and somehow more hopeful despite the pain. I got up and moved around the table to where Marcus sat. Without saying anything, I wrapped my arms around my 31-year-old son the same way I had when he was 8 and had fallen off his bike. He leaned into the hug, and I felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. I'm sorry, he whispered against my shoulder. I'm sorry I didn't trust you. I'm sorry I put Bethany through this alone. I'm sorry I've been such a mess. You don't have to apologize for being scared, I told him. You have to apologize for not letting us be scared with you. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be diabetic and still be the husband and father and son you all need me to be. Bethany squeezed his hand. You don't have to figure it out alone anymore. But the money, Marcus said, his practical concerns surfacing. Mom, you don't understand how expensive this is. Even with insurance, we're spending hundreds every month on supplies. I can't ask you to help with that. You're on a fixed income, and we're already behind on everything. I held up a hand to stop him. First of all, my finances are my business, not yours. Second, there are resources we haven't explored yet. Patient assistance programs, pharmacy discount plans, maybe even a different insurance option during open enrollment. I could see him starting to object, so I continued quickly. But most importantly, this isn't just about money. This is about you managing a serious medical condition safely. Do you know what could happen if you have a severe low blood sugar episode at work and no one knows you're diabetic? The question hung in the air, and I watched both Marcus and Bethany consider the implications. Construction sites were dangerous enough without adding unrecognized medical emergencies to the mix. I've been careful, Marcus said defensively. I check my levels regularly, I carry glucose tablets, I know the warning signs. But your coworkers don't, Bethany pointed out. If something happened and you couldn't communicate, they wouldn't know what was wrong or how to help you. I could see Marcus processing this, his engineer's mind working through the logic. He'd been so focused on hiding his condition that he hadn't fully considered the safety implications of keeping it secret. There's something else, Bethany said quietly. Ruby's been asking questions. She's noticed that you don't eat the same foods anymore, that you disappear to the bathroom more often, that you seem tired and stressed. She's 8, Marcus. She's not stupid. Marcus's face crumpled. I didn't want her to be scared. I didn't want her to think her daddy was sick. But she already thinks something's wrong, I said gently. She's been asking me if you're okay, if you're happy, why you don't eat my cookies anymore. Kids know when their parents are stressed, even if they don't understand why. The weight of all these realizations seemed to settle on Marcus's shoulders, but instead of making him look more burdened, it seemed to make him look more resolved. So, what do we do now? He asked, looking between Bethany and me. How do we fix this? We start by making some agreements, I said. About communication, about support, about honesty. We figure out how to be a family that faces challenges together instead of protecting each other from them. Bethany nodded. And we make a plan. For your health management, for the financial stuff, for telling Ruby in a way that doesn't scare her. And I added, looking directly at Marcus, you stop trying to be perfect. You stop trying to handle everything alone. You let us help you, even when it's hard for your pride. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I don't know how to do that, but okay. We'll figure it out together, I told him. That's what families do. That night, sitting around my kitchen table with the lunch cooler finally empty and its contents spread out in the open, we made some agreements that would change how our family operated going forward. First, I said, pulling out a notepad I'd grabbed from my junk drawer, we agreed that medical information gets shared. Not with the whole world, but within this family. No more secrets about health issues, no matter how scary or embarrassing they seem. Marcus nodded reluctantly. But I get to control how much detail I share and when. This is still my condition to manage. Absolutely, I agreed. But Bethany gets to ask for support when she needs it, and I get to offer help without you automatically refusing because you think you're protecting me. Bethany spoke up. And we agree that financial stress gets discussed before it becomes a crisis. No more hiding bills or struggling alone with expenses we can't handle. I watched Marcus wrestle with this one. His pride had always been tied to his ability to provide for his family, and admitting financial struggle felt like admitting failure to him. I know this is hard for you, I said gently. But Marcus, you're not failing by needing help with medical expenses. You're failing by letting pride put your health and your marriage at risk. He was quiet for a moment, then said, okay. But I want to research assistance programs and options first. I want to try to solve as much as we can ourselves before asking for help. Fair enough, I said, making notes. But you have to actually follow through on the research, and you have to accept help when it's offered and needed. Our third agreement was about Ruby. We would tell her about Marcus's diabetes together, in age-appropriate terms, focusing on the fact that it was manageable and that Daddy was taking good care of himself. She's going to have questions, Bethany warned. She might be scared at first. Then we answer her questions honestly, I said. Kids are more resilient than we think, and they handle truth better than they handle sensing that something's wrong but not knowing what. Marcus looked uncertain. What if she starts worrying about me all the time? What if it changes how she sees me? Then we deal with that too, Bethany said firmly. But Marcus, she's already worried. She's already noticed changes. At least this way, she'll understand why and know that we're handling it. Our fourth agreement was the hardest for me to make, but probably the most important. I agreed to work on being supportive without being overwhelming. No diving into diabetes research unless Marcus asked for help. No taking over his medical management. No turning his condition into my project to fix. I know I have a tendency to take charge when people I love are facing challenges, I admitted. But this is your condition to manage, not mine to solve. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening. I appreciate that, Mom. but I also want your help sometimes. I just need to be able to ask for it instead of having it forced on me." "Deal," I said, writing it down. Our final agreement was about regular check-ins. Not daily phone calls or constant monitoring, but scheduled times when we'd talk honestly about how everyone was doing, medically, financially, emotionally. Once a week, Bethany suggested. Sunday dinners, but with actual conversation about real things, not just small talk. And if someone's struggling between check-ins, they commit to reaching out instead of suffering alone, I added. Marcus looked at the list of agreements I'd written down. "This feels like a lot," he said. "It is a lot," I agreed. "But it's a lot less than what you've been carrying alone for 8 months. He nodded slowly. "You're right. And honestly, I'm tired of carrying it alone. I'm tired of being scared all the time." "Then let's start fixing that," I said. Together. The next morning, I woke up with more energy and purpose than I'd felt in months. For the first time since I discovered Marcus's secret, I knew exactly what needed to be done, and I had permission to help do it. My first call was to Helen, my nurse neighbor, who was delighted to hear that the family member with diabetes was finally getting proper support. "Bring him over," she said immediately. "I'd love to talk with him about management strategies, and I might have some resources that could help with costs." My second call was to my insurance agent. I'd been with the same company for 15 years, and I wanted to understand what options might be available for Marcus and Bethany during the next open enrollment period. Diabetes is considered a pre-existing condition, but that doesn't mean we can't find better coverage, my agent explained. There are plans specifically designed for people managing chronic conditions. The premiums might be higher, but the prescription coverage could save them hundreds every month. I took detailed notes, planning to share everything with Marcus and Bethany at our Sunday dinner. Meanwhile, Marcus had taken the day off work to start his own research. When I called to check in, he sounded more hopeful than he had in months. "Mom, there are patient assistance programs I never knew existed," he said. "The insulin manufacturer has a program that could cut our costs by 60%. And there's a pharmacy chain that offers a diabetes management program with significant discounts on supplies." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What else did you find?" "There's also a diabetes support group that meets at the community center twice a month. I'm thinking about going to the next meeting." This surprised me. Marcus had never been one for group activities or sharing personal information with strangers. But maybe the isolation of managing his condition alone had shown him the value of connecting with people who understood what he was going through. "I think that's a great idea," I told him. "Would you like me to go with you to the first meeting?" Actually, I was thinking of asking Bethany to come. She needs support too, and they have sessions for family members. I felt a warm glow of pride. My son was finally thinking about his wife's needs as well as his own. That afternoon, Bethany called with her own updates. She'd spoken with her supervisor at the veterinary clinic about adjusting her schedule to accommodate Marcus's medical needs. "Dr. Martinez was incredibly understanding," she said. "He said his brother has type 1 diabetes, so he knows how challenging it can be for families. He's going to let me work more flexible hours so I can be home when Marcus needs support with his management routine." She'd also researched local resources for families dealing with chronic illness. There's a financial counselor at the hospital who specializes in helping people navigate medical expenses and insurance issues. She can meet with us next week. But the most important development came from an unexpected source. Ruby had overheard part of a phone conversation between her parents and had asked Bethany directly if Daddy was sick. "I told her we'd all talk about it together this weekend," Bethany said. But Rosie, she wasn't scared. She was just concerned and wanted to know how she could help. That evening, the three of us met again at my kitchen table, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of fear and secrecy, there was hope and determination. Instead of carrying burdens alone, we were sharing the load. "I have a confession," Marcus said as we reviewed all the resources we'd discovered. "I feel lighter than I have in months. Not physically, my blood sugar management is still the same. But emotionally, mentally, it's like I can breathe again. That's what support does, I told him. It doesn't make the problem go away, but it makes it manageable. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone and respecting their autonomy? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories. Sunday dinner that week was unlike any we'd had in our family's history. Instead of the polite small talk and careful avoidance of difficult topics that had characterized our recent gatherings, we sat down with the explicit intention of having honest conversations about real things. Ruby arrived with her usual 8-year-old energy, chattering about school and friends and the book she was reading. But I noticed she kept glancing at her father with a thoughtful expression, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. After we'd finished eating, and I'd watched Marcus carefully check his blood sugar and take his insulin without hiding it, we moved to the living room for what we'd planned as a family meeting. Ruby, Marcus said, settling onto the couch next to his daughter, "Mom, and I want to talk to you about something important." Her face grew serious, but not frightened. "Is it about why you've been acting different lately?" The directness of her question caught all 3 adults off guard. We'd been so focused on protecting her from worry that we'd underestimated her awareness of the changes in our family dynamic. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "It is about that." He explained, in terms an 8-year-old could understand, that he had a condition called diabetes that meant his body needed help processing sugar. He showed her his insulin pen and glucose monitor, explaining how they helped keep him healthy. Ruby listened intently, asking practical questions that showed she was processing the information without fear. "Does it hurt when you check your blood? Do you have to do this forever? Is that why you don't eat grandma's cookies anymore?" Marcus answered each question honestly, and I watched my granddaughter's expression shift from curiosity to understanding to something that looked remarkably like determination. "Can I help?" she asked finally. "Help how?" Bethany asked. "Well, if Daddy needs to check his blood sugar at certain times, I could help him remember. And if he needs to eat at specific times, I could help make sure we don't forget. And if he's feeling sick from his blood sugar, I could get Mom or call Grandma." The 3 adults exchanged glances. We'd been so worried about burdening Ruby with knowledge of her father's condition that we hadn't considered she might want to be part of the solution. "That would be very helpful, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you know this isn't your job, right? You don't have to take care of Daddy. That's what grown-ups do." Ruby considered this seriously. "I know it's not my job. But it's my family. And families help each other, right?" Out of the mouths of babes. This 8-year-old had just articulated what we adults had been struggling to understand for months. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Families do help each other. So can I learn about diabetes too?" Ruby asked. "Not the scary parts, but the helpful parts? Like what foods are good for Daddy and what signs mean he needs help?" Marcus looked at Bethany, who nodded encouragingly. "I think that would be wonderful," he said. "But only if you want to, and only the parts that are appropriate for kids to know." "I want to," Ruby said firmly. "And Daddy? I'm glad you told me. I was worried that you didn't like our family dinners anymore because you seemed sad all the time." That simple statement hit all of us hard. In trying to protect Ruby from worry, Marcus had actually caused her to worry about something much worse, that he was unhappy with his family. "I love our family dinners," Marcus told her, pulling her into a hug. "And I love our family. I was just scared about being sick, but I'm not scared anymore because I have all of you to help me." Ruby hugged him back fiercely. "We're a good team," she declared. And in that moment, I knew she was right. We were finally a team again. 6 months later, I barely recognized the family that had sat around my kitchen table that tearful Tuesday evening. The transformation wasn't just in Marcus's improved diabetes management, though that was remarkable, but in how we'd all learned to show love through honesty instead of protection through secrets. Marcus's health had stabilized dramatically once he stopped managing his condition in isolation. Working with a diabetes educator Helen had recommended, he developed a routine that fit his construction schedule without compromising his safety or his job performance. His supervisor, once informed about the medical situation, had been incredibly supportive, even adjusting break schedules to accommodate blood sugar testing. The financial pressure that had been crushing them was finally manageable. The patient assistance program had reduced their insulin costs by almost 70%, and the new insurance plan we'd found during open enrollment provided much better prescription coverage. They were still paying more than they'd like for medical supplies, but it was no longer threatening their ability to keep their house. But the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The constant anxiety that had shadowed him for months was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence I remembered from before his diagnosis. He joined the diabetes support group and had even started mentoring newly diagnosed adults, helping them navigate the emotional challenges he'd faced alone. "It's strange," he told me during one of our Sunday check-ins. "I spent so much energy trying to hide this condition, and now I find myself talking about it openly. Not obsessively, but naturally, the way people talk about any part of their lives." Bethany had bloomed like a flower finally getting sunlight. The exhaustion and resentment that had been eating away at her marriage were gone, replaced by the partnership she and Marcus had always been meant to have. She'd cut back her hours at the clinic to a more sustainable schedule, and their relationship had regained the warmth and humor that had attracted them to each other in the first place. I didn't realize how much anger I was carrying, she admitted to me one afternoon while Ruby played in my backyard. Not at Marcus for having diabetes, but at the situation, at the secrecy, at feeling like I had to handle everything alone. Once we could talk about it openly, that anger just dissolved. Ruby had adapted to her father's condition with the resilience that children possess when they're given honest information and allowed to help in age-appropriate ways. She'd become Marcus's unofficial reminder system, gently asking if he'd checked his blood sugar before meals and proudly showing off her knowledge of diabetes-friendly snacks to anyone who would listen. "Daddy has diabetes, but it's not scary," she'd explained to her teacher when the school nurse needed to be informed about Marcus's condition for emergency purposes. "He just takes special medicine and checks his blood, and he's perfectly fine." The consequences of our family's 8 months of secrecy hadn't been legal or dramatic. There was no villain to punish or justice to serve in the traditional sense. But there had been a reckoning of sorts, a recognition that love expressed through protection and control can be just as damaging as neglect. The real justice came in the form of healing, growth, and the restoration of trust that had been damaged by good intentions gone wrong. The changes in our family dynamics extended far beyond Marcus's diabetes management. The crisis had forced us to examine patterns of communication and support that had been developing for years, and the improvements touched every aspect of our relationships. I'd had to confront my own tendency to turn worry into a full-time occupation. Working with a counselor, something I'd never thought I'd need at my age, I'd learned to distinguish between supportive concern and anxiety-driven control. It wasn't easy to change habits I'd developed over decades, but the improvement in my relationships with both Marcus and Bethany made the effort worthwhile. "You're different, Mom," Marcus had told me a few months into our new family dynamic. "You still care just as much, but you don't make your caring feel like pressure anymore." The financial counselor at the hospital had helped Marcus and Bethany develop a comprehensive plan for managing ongoing medical expenses while rebuilding their emergency savings. They'd learned to budget for diabetes supplies the same way they budgeted for utilities, as a necessary monthly expense rather than an unexpected crisis. More importantly, they'd learned to communicate about money before problems became overwhelming. Their marriage had grown stronger through the process of facing challenges together rather than trying to shield each other from difficult realities. The diabetes support group had become a significant part of their lives. Marcus had found mentorship opportunities that gave him purpose beyond just managing his own condition, while Bethany had connected with other spouses who understood the unique challenges of supporting a partner with a chronic illness. It's not that diabetes became easy, Bethany explained to me. It's that it became normal. It's just part of our routine now, like brushing teeth or paying bills. It doesn't define Marcus or control our family anymore. Ruby had developed an impressive understanding of nutrition and health management that served her well beyond her father's condition. Her teacher had commented on her maturity and her natural inclination to help classmates who were dealing with their own family challenges. She has an unusual capacity for empathy, the teacher had told Bethany during a parent conference. I think having a family member with a medical condition has taught her that everyone faces difficulties and that supporting each other is just what people do. The lunch bag that had started this whole journey now sat openly on Marcus's kitchen counter each morning, packed with his usual sandwich, diabetes supplies, and snacks that Ruby often helped choose. What had once been a source of secrecy and shame had become simply another tool for taking care of himself. Our Sunday dinners had evolved into genuine family meetings where we discussed everything from Ruby's school projects to Marcus's latest blood sugar patterns to my own health concerns as I aged. The artificial politeness that had characterized our gatherings for months had been replaced by authentic connection. We're not the same family we were a year ago, I reflected during one of these dinners. We're better. More honest, more supportive, more real. We're the family we always could have been, Marcus replied, if we'd trusted each other enough to be vulnerable. As I sit here now, almost a year after that accidental lunch bag exchange changed everything, I'm struck by how much wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places. What felt like a crisis at the time turned out to be exactly what our family needed, a forced confrontation with patterns of communication that weren't serving any of us. The lunch bag mix-up wasn't entirely accidental, I've come to realize. Bethany's subconscious had been looking for a way to reach out for help, and sometimes our hearts find solutions that our minds are too scared to pursue directly. Sometimes accidents happen precisely when we need them most. I've learned that there's a crucial difference between protecting someone and supporting them. Protection often involves keeping information from people or making decisions for them. Support involves giving them the tools, resources, and emotional backing they need to make their own informed decisions. For 8 months, Marcus had tried to protect me from worry, Bethany had tried to protect their marriage from additional stress, and I had unknowingly created an environment where they felt they needed to protect me from their struggles. All of that protection had actually isolated us from each other when we most needed connection. The medical condition that Marcus was so afraid would make him seem broken had actually revealed the strength and resilience that existed in our family when we stopped trying to handle everything alone. His diabetes hadn't made him less capable, it had made all of us more capable of supporting each other. Ruby's simple wisdom, families help each other, had cut through months of adult complexity and fear to identify the core truth we'd been missing. Children often see solutions that adults overcomplicate, and her natural acceptance of her father's condition had shown us all how to integrate this challenge into our lives without letting it dominate them. The financial stress that had seemed insurmountable when carried in secret became manageable when addressed as a family problem requiring family solutions. The emotional burden that had been crushing Bethany when she bore it alone became lighter when distributed among people who loved Marcus and wanted to support his health. Most importantly, I'd learned that my tendency to research, worry, and try to control outcomes, while coming from a place of love, could actually prevent the people I cared about from feeling safe enough to be vulnerable with me. Love expressed through anxiety can feel like judgment, even when that's not the intention. Today, Marcus manages his diabetes with the same matter-of-fact competence he brings to his construction work. Bethany has regained the lightness and joy that attracted Marcus to her in the first place. Ruby continues to amaze us with her capacity for empathy and her natural understanding that families face challenges together. And I've learned that being a supportive mother and grandmother doesn't mean having all the answers or preventing all the problems. It means creating space for honesty, offering help without taking over, and trusting that the people you love are stronger and more capable than your worry gives them credit for. The lunch bag that revealed our family's secrets now represents something entirely different: transparency, trust, and the courage to face life's challenges together rather than alone. Thanks for listening to my story about how one accidental lunch bag exchange taught our family the difference between protection and support. If you've experienced family health challenges or struggled with communication in your own relationships, you're not alone. Sometimes the people we're trying to protect are actually protecting us right back, and everyone ends up carrying burdens that would be lighter if shared. Sometimes love expressed through secrecy causes more harm than love expressed through honesty, even when the truth is scary. Subscribe for more real family stories about the challenges we all face and the wisdom we can find in unexpected places. And don't forget to share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that a family member was keeping a secret to protect you? How did you handle it? Your voice matters, and your story could help someone else going through something similar. Remember, families help each other. That's what we do.